His fingers closed around her ponytail and yanked hard. "Get away from me!" The words barely left his mouth before his world inverted. Sergeant Tyler Briggs found himself airborne, then flat on his back, staring at fluorescent lights through a haze of shock and agony. The woman he'd grabbed stood over him like death itself, green eyes cold as Arctic ice. 42 soldiers watched in stunned silence. Their toughest enforcer had just been destroyed in 3 seconds by a woman half his size. None of them knew she was Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen. SEAL Team 3, the most dangerous person on Fort Bragg, and she was just getting started. Subscribe to my channel and follow this story to the end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The explosion still lived inside Sophia Chen's chest like a second heartbeat. 8 months couldn't erase the sound. 8 months couldn't wash away the smell of burning flesh and diesel fuel and death. 8 months couldn't bring back the 3 people she'd loved most in this world. And 8 months couldn't silence the screaming that echoed through her dreams every single night. She remembered everything. The convoy had been rolling through the Helmand Valley at 0347 hours when the world ended. Senior Chief Marcus Webb was in the lead vehicle, the same man who'd pulled her through Bud's training when hypothermia had her seeing ghosts and her body was ready to quit. He was telling a joke over the radio, something stupid about a sailor and a Marine walking into a bar. He never finished it. The IED detonated with enough force to flip a 12-ton MRAP like a child's toy. The fireball consumed everything in a radius of 30 meters, and Sophia watched from the second vehicle as Marcus Webb's laughter turned into screaming that lasted exactly 4 seconds before the ammunition cooked off and ended everything. Contact left. Contact left. Petty Officer First Class Diana Torres was already moving her weapon up, her voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around them. Diana had been Sophia's best friend since they were 17 years old. 2 girls from opposite coasts who'd found each other at boot camp and never let go. They'd survived BUDS together, survived deployment after deployment together, survived everything the world had thrown at them. Diana didn't survive Helmand. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously. Sophia's tactical mind registered the setup even as her heart shattered into pieces too small to ever reassemble. The enemy had known exactly where to position, exactly when to strike, exactly how to maximize casualties, because someone had told them. Sophia RPG. Diana's warning came a half-second too late. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the ground 3 meters from their position, and the concussion wave threw Sophia backward like a rag doll. When she opened her eyes, Diana was lying face down in the dirt. Her body armor shredded her blood, soaking into Afghan soil that had drunk the blood of warriors for 1,000 years. Diana, Diana, stay with me. Sophia crawled to her friend, ignoring the gunfire, ignoring the screaming, ignoring everything except the woman who'd been her sister, in everything but blood. Diana's eyes were open, fixed on something Sophia couldn't see, and her lips were moving with words too quiet to hear. What, Diana? What are you saying? She leaned closer, pressing her ear to Diana's lips, and heard the last words her best friend would ever speak. Not your fault. Diana Torres died at 0351 hours on a Thursday morning in a valley that most Americans couldn't find on a map. She was 25 years old. Chief Petty Officer James Park died 3 minutes later, taking a bullet meant for a wounded Army sergeant. His wife was 8 months pregnant with their first child. He'd shown Sophia the ultrasound photos just 2 days before his face lit up with the kind of joy that made you believe in tomorrow. James never met his daughter. The firefight lasted 17 minutes. When the helicopters finally arrived and the enemy melted back into the mountains, Sophia sat among the bodies of her friends and screamed until her voice broke and her throat bled and her lungs burned with the effort of expressing grief that no sound could contain. 3 SEALs dead. And the after-action report told her exactly why. Army Special Forces intelligence had provided the route clearance assessment. They'd marked the road as low risk, based on outdated satellite imagery and local sources they deemed unreliable. They'd ignored contradictory intelligence from CIA assets. They'd dismissed warnings from Afghan National Army contacts who knew the terrain better than any American ever would. They'd been wrong, and Marcus, Diana, and James had paid for that arrogance with their lives. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. The findings were classified, buried, sanitized into bureaucratic language that transformed murder by incompetence into regrettable intelligence failures and lessons learned and procedural adjustments going forward. No one was punished. No one was held accountable. No one even apologized. Sophia Chen spent 3 months in mandatory psychological evaluation, not because she was broken, but because the Navy needed to make sure their youngest female SEAL team commander wasn't going to do something that would embarrass them. She passed every test, answered every question, demonstrated every coping mechanism they wanted to see. And then she requested her next assignment. The admiral who approved it was a friend of her father's, a man who'd known Sophia since she was a child, playing with toy soldiers and dreaming of becoming one herself. He'd looked at her request for a long moment, his weathered face betraying nothing. "You sure about this, Sophia? This isn't a combat deployment. It's an evaluation mission, administrative." "I'm sure, sir." "The unit you'd be assessing. They're connected to what happened in Helmand. Not directly, but the same command structure, the same institutional problems." "I know, sir." This could be seen as a conflict of interest, a personal vendetta dressed up as professional duty. Sophia met his eyes without flinching. "With respect, Admiral, my friends died because of institutional arrogance that treated intelligence verification as optional and dismissal of contradictory information as standard procedure. If that culture still exists, someone needs to document it. If it doesn't, the Army deserves credit for fixing their problems. And if you find what you expect to find, then I'll recommend whatever actions are appropriate to prevent other operators from dying the way Marcus and Diana and James died." The Admiral signed the orders. And now, 8 months after watching her world burn, Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen was walking into Fort Bragg's main dining facility to discover whether the Army had learned anything at all. The dining facility buzzed with the particular energy of men who believed they owned everything they surveyed. Sophia entered at 1930 hours, her uniform carefully stripped of all rank insignia, her credentials tucked into a leather folder she had no intention of showing until the right moment. At 26, she looked younger than her years. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail that caught the harsh fluorescent light. Her green eyes swept the room with the systematic assessment of someone who'd learned to read hostile environments the hard way. 42 soldiers occupied the space like kings surveying conquered territory. The central table commanded Sophia's attention immediately. Master Sergeant Derek Morrison sat at its head holding court with the practiced ease of a man who'd never been challenged in his own domain. He was 38 years old, built like a tank, with the kind of square jaw and cold eyes that recruiting posters loved and smart people learned to fear. 3 combat tours, a chest full of ribbons, a reputation that preceded him like a warning shot. They called him Hammer, and everything about his body language suggested he'd earned that name in ways that had nothing to do with construction. "I'm telling you," Morrison's voice carried across the room with the confidence of absolute authority, These diversity initiatives are going to get people killed. You can't lower standards just to make politicians feel good about themselves." The men around him nodded like disciples receiving gospel. Sergeant First Class Tyler Briggs, the unit's unofficial enforcer, grinned with all teeth and no warmth. At 29, Briggs had failed Special Forces selection twice before finally passing on his third attempt. That failure had calcified into resentment he wore like armor. "Combat doesn't care about your feelings," Briggs added, his pale eyes scanning the room for anyone who might dare to disagree. "It cares about whether you can carry your weight when things go sideways." Specialist Ryan Torres pulled out his phone, already framing a shot for his Instagram followers. At 24, he was hungry for validation in ways that made him dangerous. "Green Berets own this base. Always have, always will." Private Marcus Wells, the youngest at 21, laughed too loud at jokes he didn't quite understand. His desperation to belong radiated from every gesture, every word, every eager nod of agreement. Sophia found an empty table in the corner, positioned herself with her back to the wall and clear sight lines to all 3 exits, and began eating with the mechanical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. No one challenged her presence. No one asked for credentials. No one even looked twice at the slim leather folder tucked beside her tray. It was exactly the kind of security failure that had gotten her friends killed. She pulled out a small notebook and began taking notes, her pen moving across the page in precise strokes. Not about what she was seeing, but about what she wasn't seeing. No senior NCOs visible during prime dinner hours. No officers mixing with enlisted personnel. No evidence of the professional cohesion that marked elite military formations. Just cliques and posturing, and the toxic masculinity that turned warriors into playground bullies. Morrison's voice cut through the ambient noise again. "These pencil pushers from the Pentagon think they can evaluate us. They've never fired a weapon in anger, never watched a buddy bleed out in the dirt. They sit in their air-conditioned offices and write reports about things they don't understand." "Heard we've got some evaluation team coming next week," Briggs said. "Probably some admiral's kid getting the grand tour before Daddy retires. We'll bury them in paperwork and doctrine until they beg to go home." Sophia continued eating, continued taking notes, continued cataloging every failure of professional standards she witnessed. The conversation at the central table grew louder, cruder, more confident that no one of consequence was listening. They were wrong. She'd been in the dining facility for 23 minutes when Sergeant First Class Tyler Briggs noticed her. His eyes narrowed, tracking her like a predator spotting potential prey. She was alone. She was female. She was sitting in their space without apparent authorization or purpose. In his worldview, that made her fair game for whatever entertainment he chose to extract. He stood up from the central table, ostensibly to clear his tray. His path took him directly past Sophia's corner. This wasn't a coincidence. The serving line and disposal area were in the opposite direction. This was a deliberate maneuver, a probing action designed to establish dominance over someone he'd already decided was inferior. Sophia didn't look up from her notebook. Briggs paused beside her table, close enough that his shadow fell across her notes. Still, she didn't react. Her pen continued moving in smooth, controlled strokes. Subject demonstrates predatory approach pattern. Testing boundaries. Seeking confrontation. Classic dominance behavior consistent with insecure authority complex. "Excuse me, ma'am." His tone was superficially polite, but carried an undertone of condescension thick enough to choke on. Sophia had heard that tone 1,000 times from men who believed their gender automatically granted them authority over hers. She looked up, meeting his eyes with the kind of level stare that had made insurgent leaders reconsider their life choices. "Yes." The single word was neutral professional, completely devoid of the nervousness or deference he'd been expecting. Those green eyes held depths that should have warned him he was making a terrible mistake. Briggs had never been good at reading warnings. "I'm Sergeant First Class Briggs, Delta Company. And you are?" He extended his hand with the kind of forced friendliness that was really just another form of aggression. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Nothing about him suggested genuine welcome. Sophia looked at his outstretched hand for exactly 2 seconds. "Busy." The single word hit Briggs like a physical blow. Around the dining facility, conversations stopped as soldiers tuned into the drama playing out in the corner. Phones appeared as word spread through the modern military's most efficient communication network. This wasn't how these encounters were supposed to go. Briggs was Special Forces. He was Alpha. He was supposed to command respect and deference, not get dismissed like some boot private who'd forgotten his place. His face flushed red above his collar. "Look, ma'am." His voice dropped to a register meant to be threatening. "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but this is an Army facility. We have protocols, procedures. Maybe you're lost. Maybe you need an escort back to wherever you're supposed to be." Sophia finished writing her sentence, capped her pen with deliberate precision, and looked up at him again. This time her expression held a hint of amusement. "Sergeant, do you always introduce yourself to visitors by assuming they're lost and offering to escort them off base?" The trap was perfect. If Briggs backed down now, he'd look weak in front of his audience. If he escalated, he'd be taking action against an unidentified individual without proper authority. Either choice would reveal critical information about his judgment, his training, and his fitness for leadership. Briggs chose escalation. His hand moved toward her shoulder, intending to guide her to her feet, to establish physical dominance through uninvited contact. It was a move that had worked for him before, with civilians who didn't know any better, with contractors who couldn't afford to make waves. He had no idea that the quiet woman sitting in the corner had spent the last decade perfecting the art of violence. Sophia's response was instantaneous. Her left hand intercepted his wrist with surgical precision, fingers finding the pressure point where the radial nerve surfaced just below his thumb joint. The contact lasted exactly 1 second, long enough to send white-hot agony shooting up his arm, not long enough for him to process what was happening. Briggs tried to pull back. Sophia let him pull, encouraged. It used his own momentum against him in a way that turned his retreat into forward motion he couldn't control. Her right hand appeared at his elbow, not grabbing, just guiding, redirecting his energy along vectors his body understood but his brain couldn't comprehend. Physics took over. Briggs's center of gravity shifted forward, his weight committed to a direction he hadn't chosen. 220 pounds of Special Forces muscle, suddenly as helpless as a child's toy in the hands of someone who understood leverage and anatomy, and the beautiful simplicity of applied force. He hit the floor hard. Shoulder first, then hip, then the side of his face, meeting unforgiving concrete with a sound like someone dropping a sack of potatoes from a significant height. The silence that followed was absolute. 42 soldiers sat frozen forks halfway to mouths, witnessing the impossible. Tyler Briggs, the unit's enforcer, sprawled on the floor like a discarded puppet, while a woman who couldn't weigh more than 140 stood over him like she'd just swatted a mosquito. "Physics," Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "Action-reaction, basic Newtonian mechanics." She looked down at him with patient tolerance. "Also personal space, Sergeant. Generally speaking, you don't touch people without permission." Master Sergeant Derek Morrison was on his feet, his chair crashing backward. His face had gone through several interesting color changes, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The careful control he'd maintained over his domain was cracking. "Who the hell do you think you are?" His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to instant obedience. "You just assaulted one of my soldiers." Sophia turned to face him. and Morrison got his first good look at those green eyes. They were calm, professional, completely unmoved by his display of authority. "Your soldier assaulted me, Sergeant. I defended myself using minimum force necessary to terminate unwanted physical contact. That's textbook self-defense doctrine." She paused, letting that sink in. "Unless you're suggesting that your soldiers should be permitted to grab female personnel without consequence. Is that standard operating procedure for Delta Company?" The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Morrison's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He was caught between contradictory imperatives: defend his soldier or avoid a sexual harassment investigation that would end his career. The smart play was to de-escalate. But Derek Morrison hadn't made Master Sergeant by being smart. "Lady, I don't know what kind of games you think you're playing, but this is a United States Army facility. We have procedures here. You can't just..." "Can't just what?" Sophia's voice remained level conversational. "Can't sit in your dining facility? Can't eat a meal? Can't exist in a space you've decided belongs exclusively to you and people who look like you?" Briggs was back on his feet, now cradling his arm against his chest. His face was flushed with embarrassment and fury. "You sucker punched me. That was a cheap shot. You got lucky because I wasn't expecting..." "Sergeant." Sophia's voice cut through his protest. "If I wanted to sucker punch you, you'd still be unconscious. What you experienced was a compliance technique designed to disengage unwanted physical contact. It's the same move they teach elementary school children in anti-bullying programs." The comparison to elementary school children was calculated, deliberate, designed to probe exactly how far his ego would let him fall. Briggs's face darkened. "Compliance technique? You think you're some kind of martial arts expert? You think one lucky move makes you tough?" He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, settled into a fighting stance. "Tell you what, lady, you apologize for that cheap shot and I'll forget this ever happened. We'll call it a misunderstanding. No harm, no foul." Sophia looked at him with clinical interest. "And if I don't apologize?" Briggs's grin was all teeth, no warmth. "Then maybe you need to learn some respect for soldiers in general, and me in particular." The threat was clear, unambiguous, delivered in front of 40 witnesses with their phones out and recording. "Sergeant," Sophia said, her voice carrying the kind of matter-of-fact calm that made smart people nervous. "Are you challenging me to a fight?" Briggs's bravado faltered slightly. She'd already put him on the floor once without apparent effort, but something about his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'm suggesting that maybe you bit off more than you can chew, that maybe you're used to intimidating desk jockeys and you figured you'd come slum it with the real military." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I see. So to be clear, you grabbed me without permission, I extracted myself using minimal force, and now you want to escalate because your feelings are hurt." Put that way, it sounded exactly as stupid as it was. "You know what?" Sophia sat back down at her table with fluid grace. "I'm good. You've already demonstrated everything I needed to know about your judgment, your training, and your fitness for leadership. Thanks for the data point." She picked up her pen and returned to her notebook, dismissing the entire encounter as beneath her notice. It was perfect psychological manipulation. Briggs stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard, every muscle screaming for action. He could walk away and accept the implied insult, or he could escalate and risk discovering exactly how badly he'd misjudged the quiet woman in the corner. The entire dining facility held its breath, and Tyler Briggs made his choice. His hands shot toward her ponytail fingers, grasping for auburn hair, intending to jerk her head back and establish dominance through the kind of brutal tactics that had worked for him since childhood. His fingers had barely grazed her hair when the world exploded into motion and pain. What happened next would become legend. Sophia's body uncoiled from the chair like a compressed spring. Her right elbow drove backward into Briggs's solar plexus with pile driver force. The blow landed exactly where her anatomy knowledge told her it would do maximum damage directly into the cluster of nerves that controlled his diaphragm. The air exploded from his lungs. He doubled over reflexively, and Sophia's left hand captured his wrist, applying a joint lock that turned his own momentum into a lever against his shoulder socket. The technique was called Kimura in martial arts circles, though Sophia had learned it in considerably less civilized circumstances. The lock engaged with mechanical precision. Briggs's shoulder joint reached its maximum range of motion, then kept going. Pain shot down his arm like molten copper. He tried to pull away, which only made everything worse. The human shoulder, Sophia said conversationally, is a remarkably complex joint. 26 separate muscles, 4 major ligament groups, very versatile but structurally vulnerable. She adjusted her grip slightly, and Briggs made a sound like a wounded animal. For instance, if I rotate your arm just 3 degrees further in this direction, your shoulder dislocates. 6 degrees and the rotator cuff tears. 9 degrees and you're looking at reconstructive surgery. The silence was absolute. Sophia held the lock for exactly 5 seconds, demonstrating complete control, then released him with a casual motion that sent him stumbling backward. Briggs collapsed into an empty chair, gasping, his face gray with pain. Master Sergeant Morrison's face had cycled through every color imaginable and settled somewhere between rage and disbelief. "That's enough," his voice cracked like a whip. "I don't know who you think you are, but you just assaulted 2 of my soldiers. That's a criminal offense. Sergeant, your soldier grabbed my hair without permission. That's assault. I defended myself using appropriate force." She gestured toward Briggs. "I gave him multiple opportunities to walk away. He chose violence. I simply responded more efficiently than he expected." Morrison stepped closer, using his height and bulk to intimidate. "You think this is funny? You think you can come into my facility, assault my soldiers, and walk away like nothing happened?" "Your facility?" Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "I was under the impression this was a United States Army facility open to all authorized personnel. When did it become your personal kingdom?" The question hit its target with sniper precision. Morrison's face flushed darker. "You want to know whose kingdom this is? Let me explain how things work around here. This is Delta Company. These are my soldiers. And you," he pointed a thick finger in her face. "You're nobody. A civilian contractor, maybe. A Pentagon desk jockey, probably. Some admiral's diversity hire who thinks a weekend self-defense class makes her a warrior." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "But you're about to learn what happens when you disrespect real soldiers in their own house." Sophia didn't react to the finger in her face, didn't step back, didn't show any submissive body language. "You're right about one thing, Sergeant." Her voice was quiet, controlled. "I am nobody, just someone trying to eat dinner in peace before I brief your commanding officer on inter-service cooperation protocols." The mention of the commanding officer should have been a warning. It inflamed Morrison's paranoia instead. "Brief the CO about what? About how my soldiers need sensitivity training, about how we're all sexist pigs who can't handle strong women." Sophia's response was delivered with absolute certainty. "Sergeant, I don't think I can do anything. I know exactly what I can do. The question is whether you're smart enough to avoid finding out firsthand." The gauntlet was down, and before Morrison could respond, before he could make the choice that would seal his fate, Sophia pulled a slim leather folder from her pocket. She opened it with deliberate precision and held it out where everyone could see. The identification card bore official SEAL's clearance levels that made Morrison's security clearance look like a library card, and a photograph that left no doubt about her identity. "Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen, SEAL Team 3, Naval Special Warfare Command." The silence that followed was the kind that followed explosions. Currently conducting classified assessment of inter-service cooperation protocols and unit readiness for joint operations. Morrison's face went through a transformation that would have been comical if the implications weren't catastrophic. His complexion drained to the color of old parchment. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the past 47 minutes, I've been observing and documenting the behavior discipline and professional conduct of Delta Company. Her gaze swept across the room. And I have to tell you, Sergeant, she looked directly into his eyes. Your friends in Helmand got 3 of my people killed with the same institutional arrogance I'm witnessing right now. The weight of those words settled over the room like a death sentence. Senior Chief Marcus Webb, Petty Officer First Class Diana Torres, Chief Petty Officer James Park. Her voice carried an edge that made every soldier flinch. They died because Army intelligence couldn't be bothered to verify their information, because someone decided they knew better, because institutional arrogance overrode professional discipline. She closed the folder with deliberate finality. The same culture I've documented here tonight. Morrison stood frozen, his world crumbling around him, and Sophia Chen, 26 years old, youngest female SEAL team commander in naval special warfare history, smiled with absolutely no warmth whatsoever. Now, let's talk about what happens next. The words hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the dining facility, choking the breath from 42 soldiers who suddenly understood they'd been dancing on the edge of a cliff without knowing it. Morrison's voice came out as barely a whisper. Commander. That's correct, Sergeant. Sophia's tone remained level professional, devastatingly calm. She didn't need to raise her voice. The identification card in her hand spoke louder than any shout ever could. SEAL Team 3, Naval Special Warfare Command. And for the past 47 minutes, every single thing you've said, every joke you've made, every assumption you've demonstrated has been documented for review by your commanding officer, your executive officer, and a representative from Army Special Forces Command. Private Marcus Wells looked like he was going to vomit. His phone was still in his hand, still recording, and the realization of what he'd captured hit him like a freight train. Ma'am, I didn't know. That's the problem, Private. Sophia's eyes swept across the room, and every soldier who met her gaze looked away first. None of you knew. None of you bothered to find out. An unidentified individual walked into your facility, sat down in your dining area, and not one of you challenged my credentials. Not one of you verified my authorization to be here. Not one of you did the basic security protocol that should be second nature to any soldier above the rank of E2. She let that sink in. In a combat environment, that kind of failure gets people killed. Briggs was still cradling his arm, his face a mask of pain and dawning horror. The swagger had evaporated, replaced by the desperate calculation of a man watching his career circle the drain. Commander, I want to formally apologize. Save it. The 2 words cut through his rehearsed contrition like a blade through silk. I'm not interested in apologies, Sergeant. Apologies are what people offer when they've been caught. I'm interested in understanding. I'm interested in whether you actually comprehend what happened here tonight. Morrison found his voice, though it sounded nothing like the confident authority he'd projected minutes earlier. Ma'am, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. If we'd known who you were, that's exactly my point. Sophia stepped closer to him, and despite being 6 inches shorter and 60 pounds lighter, she somehow made him feel small. If you'd known who I was, you would have behaved differently. You would have been professional, respectful. You would have followed protocols and demonstrated the discipline expected of Army Special Forces. Her voice dropped to something cold. But you didn't know. So you showed me who you really are when you think no one important is watching. The silence that followed was suffocating. 8 months ago, Sophia continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I led a joint operation with your sister company in Helmand Province. The mission brief promised a clear route, low risk, routine convoy escort. She pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page covered in precise handwriting. Army intelligence provided the route clearance assessment. They marked the road as safe based on outdated satellite imagery. They dismissed contradictory intelligence from CIA assets because they deemed those sources unreliable. They ignored warnings from Afghan National Army contacts who actually knew the terrain. Morrison's face had gone gray. The IED detonated at 0347 hours. Senior Chief Marcus Webb was in the lead vehicle. Her voice didn't waver, but something in her eyes went cold and distant. He was telling a joke over the radio when he died. Something about a sailor and a Marine walking into a bar. He never finished it. No one moved. No one breathed. Petty Officer First Class Diana Torres was my best friend since boot camp. We survived buds together. Survived everything together. She died 3 meters from my position, bleeding out in Afghan dirt while I held her hand and listened to her tell me it wasn't my fault. Sophia's jaw tightened. Chief Petty Officer James Park's wife was 8 months pregnant. He'd shown me the ultrasound photos 2 days before the convoy. He was going to name his daughter after his grandmother. She looked directly at Morrison. He never met his daughter, Sergeant, because someone in Army Special Forces decided they knew better than the people on the ground, because institutional arrogance overrode professional discipline, because verifying intelligence was apparently too much trouble. The words landed like body blows. That's not us. Morrison's protest came out weak, desperate. We had nothing to do with Helmand. You had nothing to do with the specific operation. But you're part of the same culture, the same command structure, the same institutional blindness that killed my friends. Sophia held up her notebook. Tonight I documented 17 separate violations of professional conduct standards. I documented 2 assaults on a superior officer. I documented failure to verify credentials, failure to maintain basic security protocols, and a command climate that tolerates harassment and discrimination as normal operating procedure. She closed the notebook with deliberate finality. Under normal circumstances, this report would result in immediate disciplinary action, courts-martial for Sergeant Briggs, administrative separation from multiple members of your unit, career-ending consequences for everyone who participated in or witnessed tonight's events without intervening. Wells made a sound like a wounded animal. Please, ma'am. I just got here. You didn't mean to laugh at sexist jokes. You didn't mean to record what you thought would be entertainment at a woman's expense. You didn't mean to participate in a culture that treats harassment as team building. Wells had no answer. Torres, the Instagram specialist, had gone completely pale. His phone was still in his hand, but it might as well have been a grenade with the pin pulled. My followers, he whispered. I was going to post what specialist video of your sergeant grabbing a woman's hair commentary on how you handle female personnel who don't know their place. Torres looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. That would have been quite the content. Probably would have gone viral. Definitely would have ended every career in this room. Sophia let the implications hang in the air. Fortunately for all of you, I confiscated every recording device in this facility the moment I revealed my credentials. Digital forensics is already ensuring that nothing from tonight reaches any platform without my authorization. The relief that flickered across Torres's face died immediately when he saw her expression. That's not a favor, specialist. That's evidence preservation. Morrison stepped forward, his hands raised in what might have been supplication or surrender. Commander Chen, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. What happened to your team in Helmand was a tragedy, and what happened here tonight was inexcusable. He swallowed hard. But I'm asking you, I'm begging you to give us a chance to make this right. We're not the same unit that made those intelligence failures. We're not the same soldiers who got your friends killed. Aren't you? The question was quiet, but it carried more weight than a shout. You saw a woman alone in your dining facility and immediately classified her as prey. You assumed incompetence based on gender. You attempted physical intimidation when verbal dominance failed. And when your authority was challenged, your first instinct was escalation rather than assessment. She shook her head slowly. That's not a personnel problem, Sergeant. That's a cultural problem. And it's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to intelligence failures, operational catastrophes, and dead Americans. Morrison's shoulders sagged. What do you want from us? I want to know if you're capable of learning. The words hung in the air, unexpected, carrying a thread of possibility that hadn't existed a moment before. The evaluation period isn't over, Sergeant. I have 72 hours to complete my assessment and submit my recommendations. What I've documented tonight would be sufficient to end this unit's existence. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. However, that single word made every soldier in the room lean forward. Assessments can be amended. Conclusions can be revised based on subsequent performance. If Delta Company can demonstrate that tonight was an aberration rather than standard operating procedure that might be reflected in my final report. Morrison's voice was urgent, desperate. What do we need to do? Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, practical evaluation. Sophia's smile was cold, but not entirely without mercy. You're going to have the opportunity to demonstrate whether your unit has any actual capability beyond intimidating civilians and grabbing women's hair. She looked around the room one final time. The exercise will be observed by your commanding officer, your executive officer, and Brigadier General Victor Stone from Army Special Forces Command. Your performance will determine not just your individual futures, but whether Delta Company continues to exist. The weight of those words settled over them like a death sentence. I suggest you use the intervening hours wisely. Study your manuals. Review your protocols. Think very carefully about the assumptions that brought you to this moment. She gathered her things with practiced efficiency. Oh, and gentlemen, every eye in the room locked onto her. I've been on this base for 96 hours, not 3. I know every inch of terrain you think you own. I've mapped your rally points, your cache locations, your communication frequencies. Tomorrow's exercise won't be a competition. Her smile carried no warmth whatsoever. It will be an education. She walked out of the dining facility without looking back, leaving 42 soldiers to contemplate the wreckage of their careers and wonder if they had any future left to salvage. The moment the door closed behind her, the room erupted. We're finished. Briggs slumped into a chair, his injured arm hanging useless at his side. Courts-martial, dishonorable discharge, everything I've worked for, shut up. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. Nobody's finished until I say we're finished. She's a SEAL commander, Sarge. She's got documentation, witnesses, video evidence. I said shut up. The command silenced Briggs, but it couldn't silence the panic spreading through the room like wildfire. Torres was frantically checking his phone, confirming that his recordings had indeed been wiped remotely. How did she do that? That's my personal device, my property. She's naval special warfare. Wells's voice was hollow. They have capabilities we can't even imagine. Morrison stood in the center of the room, his mind racing through options, possibilities, anything that might salvage this disaster. Listen to me. All of you. The room fell silent. She said the assessment could be amended. She said our performance tomorrow could change her conclusions. That means we still have a chance. A chance to do what? Briggs's laugh was bitter. She took me apart in 3 seconds. 3 seconds. And she wasn't even trying. Then we'd better spend tonight figuring out how to do better. Morrison pulled out his phone and started making calls. I want every tactical manual on joint operations reviewed by midnight. I want communication protocols practiced until they're muscle memory. I want every soldier in this room operating at peak performance when that sun comes up. He looked around at his men, seeing fear and desperation and the beginning of something that might have been determination. We've got one shot at this. One chance to prove we're not the worthless excuses for soldiers she thinks we are. One opportunity to show that Delta Company is capable of learning from its mistakes. His voice hardened. And if any of you screws this up tomorrow, if any of you gives her one more piece of evidence to add to that report, I will personally ensure that your military career ends in the most painful way possible. The threat hung in the air, but it was almost unnecessary. Every soldier in that room understood what was at stake. Now move. We've got 8 hours to prepare for the fight of our lives. And what none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that their preparation was already being observed. In the shadows outside the dining facility, Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen watched through a spotting scope as the soldiers scrambled to their feet and began their frantic preparations. She noted the fear in their movements, the desperation in their voices, the first cracks in the arrogant facade they'd maintained for so long. It was a start. But fear alone wouldn't be enough. Fear faded. Fear could be rationalized away once the immediate threat passed. What she needed to instill was something deeper. Something that would fundamentally change how these soldiers viewed themselves and their place in the military hierarchy. She needed to break them completely before she could rebuild them into something better. Tomorrow's exercise would be the hammer. Their assumptions would be the anvil. And by the time the sun set on Fort Bragg, every soldier in Delta Company would understand exactly why the quiet woman in the corner had been the most dangerous person in that dining facility. Sophia lowered her scope and checked her watch. 100 hours until the exercise began. She had preparations of her own to make. The soldiers thought they knew the terrain. They thought their home field advantage would count for something. They thought that 42 trained operators could contain a single target, even a target as skilled as a SEAL commander. They were wrong about all of it. Sophia had spent 96 hours mapping every inch of Fort Bragg's training facilities. She'd identified 17 different cache locations where the soldiers stored backup equipment. She'd compromised their communication frequencies 3 days ago. She knew their standard operating procedures better than they did because she'd studied their training records, their after-action reports, their documented failures and successes. Tomorrow, she would use all of it. Not to humiliate them, though that would certainly be a side effect, but to teach them the most important lesson any warrior could learn. Assumptions kill. Arrogance kills. The only thing that keeps you alive in hostile territory is constant vigilance, relentless verification, and the humility to acknowledge that you might be wrong. Marcus Webb had known that lesson. Diana Torres had known it. James Park had known it. They'd died anyway because the soldiers providing their intelligence hadn't learned it yet. Tomorrow, Delta Company would learn, or they would cease to exist. Either outcome would honor the memory of 3 operators who'd deserved better than the death they'd received. Sophia turned away from the dining facility and disappeared into the darkness. In 8 hours, the real evaluation would begin, and not a single soldier inside that building had any idea what was coming. The darkness before dawn carried a different weight than anything those soldiers had ever experienced, At 04:45 hours, 42 members of Delta Company stood in perfect formation on the parade ground, their breath visible in the morning chill, their futures hanging by threads so thin they could barely see them. They'd spent the night reviewing protocols, practicing communication drills, preparing for an evaluation that none of them truly understood. Morrison stood at the head of the formation, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the woman who held their fates in her hands. "Remember what I told you," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for his soldiers to hear. "This is our chance. Our only chance. Whatever she throws at us, we adapt. We overcome. We prove that last night was a mistake, not a pattern." Briggs stood beside him, his injured arm still aching from the joint lock that had nearly torn his shoulder apart. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain, but he'd channeled that fury into determination. "What do you think she's got planned, Sarge?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, we handle it like professionals. No ego, no assumptions. We verify everything, challenge nothing, and demonstrate that Delta Company knows how to follow protocols when it matters." The words sounded good. They would prove meaningless within the hour. 3 vehicles approached the parade ground at exactly 0500. The first carried Colonel Patricia Vance and Major Thomas Bradley, their faces unreadable in the pre-dawn light. The second brought Brigadier General Victor Stone from Army Special Forces Command, a man whose reputation preceded him like a thunderclap. At 62, Stone had seen everything and been impressed by very little, but it was the third vehicle that commanded everyone's attention. Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen emerged wearing full combat gear that looked like it had seen actual use in environments where mistakes meant body bags. Her equipment was functional, well-maintained, configured with the attention to detail that marked someone who understood that gear failures in the field meant death. She moved toward the formation with the same fluid grace she'd demonstrated in the dining facility, and Morrison felt his stomach drop. This woman had already defeated his best fighter without breaking a sweat. What was she going to do to the rest of them? Colonel Vance's voice carried across the parade ground with absolute authority. "Gentlemen, you are about to participate in a practical evaluation designed to assess your unit's operational readiness and professional competence. This evaluation will be conducted by Commander Chen, observed by General Stone, and documented for review by Army Special Forces leadership." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "The scenario is simple. Commander Chen represents a high-value target located in hostile territory. Your mission is to capture or neutralize this target using appropriate tactics and procedures." Sophia stepped forward, and every soldier in the formation tensed. "Rules of engagement. I will be armed with simulation rounds and defensive equipment only. You will have full access to your combat loadout, including simulated weapons communications and support assets. The exercise area encompasses the entire training facility, approximately 4 square kilometers of varied terrain." She looked directly at Morrison. "You have 15 minutes to plan your operation, organize your forces, and begin execution. I will give you a 5-minute head start before beginning evasion. Your objective is to locate, fix, and capture the target within 2 hours." General Stone stepped forward, his expression granite hard. "Understand this, soldiers. This is not a training exercise where everyone gets participation trophies. This is a practical demonstration of your capabilities measured against genuine special operations standards." He gestured toward the observation post on the nearby ridge. "Your performance will be monitored, recorded, and analyzed by personnel with actual combat experience. There will be no do-overs, no second chances, no excuses." His voice dropped to something cold. "What happens in the next 2 hours will determine whether Delta Company continues to exist or becomes a footnote in Army history." Sophia checked her watch. 15 minutes, Sergeant Morrison. Use them wisely. Morrison spread a topographic map across the hood of the nearest vehicle, his mind racing through tactical options. Around him, his squad leaders gathered with the desperate focus of men whose lives depended on the next 2 hours. Listen up. We're hunting a SEAL commander with unknown capabilities across 4 square kilometers. She knows we're coming. She's had time to prepare, and she's already demonstrated that our assumptions about her are worthless. Briggs leaned over the map, his injured arm forgotten in the intensity of the moment. Sarge, she's one person. We're 42. Numbers have to count for something. Numbers didn't help when she took you apart in 3 seconds. The words stung, but Briggs couldn't argue with them. We need to think like hunters, not like bullies. We use our advantages, communications, coordination, local knowledge, while minimizing our exposure to hers. What are her advantages? Torres asked, finally contributing something beyond Instagram content. Superior individual skills, better environmental awareness, extensive experience in evasion and escape. She'll use terrain, create multiple fallback positions, try to isolate us into smaller groups where she can engage on favorable terms. Morrison began marking positions with swift strokes. We set up overlapping search grids, maintain constant communication, move in mutually supporting elements. No one operates alone. No one breaks radio protocol. No one engages without backup. The plan that emerged was competent. Coordinated sweeps, overwatch positions, communication protocols designed to prevent the kind of isolation tactics that special operators specialized in. What none of them realized was that they were planning in full view of Building 14's 4th floor windows 300 meters away, where Sophia was watching through a spotting scope and listening to their radio frequencies. She'd compromised their communications 96 hours ago. Every word they spoke was being recorded. Time, Sophia's voice called from across the parade ground. Deploy to initial positions. The exercise begins in 5 minutes. Morrison looked at his soldiers, seeing fear and determination and the desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, they might salvage something from this catastrophe. Remember, verify everything, assume nothing. She's already proven she's not what she appears to be. Don't make the same mistake twice. The soldiers moved out with professional precision, fanning across the training facility in coordinated teams. Morrison watched them go, a hollow feeling in his chest. They were walking into something they didn't understand, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia Chen had already won. The 5-minute head start expired. Morrison's radio crackled to life with a voice that made his blood run cold. Check your 6, Sergeant. He spun weapon, coming up, scanning for threats that weren't there. Your rally points are compromised. Your cache locations are known. Your communication frequencies are mapped. Sophia's voice was calm, almost conversational. I've been on this base for 96 hours, not 3. I know every inch of terrain you think you own. The psychological impact was devastating. Every advantage Morrison thought he possessed evaporated in an instant. You have 5 minutes. I suggest you use them differently than planned. Then silence. Morrison's hand trembled slightly as he keyed his radio. All units, this is Morrison. The target has compromised our operational security. Rally points and cache locations are no longer secure. Adapt your positions and maintain radio discipline. The responses came back confused, uncertain. Sarge, how did she? I don't know how. I just know she did. Focus on the mission. Find her before she finds us. But Sophia had no intention of being found. For the first 30 minutes, she simply vanished. No thermal signature, no radio emissions, no physical evidence of her passage. She became a ghost moving through terrain that 42 soldiers were frantically searching while leaving no trace of her existence. Private Harrison was the first to report contact. Movement at Building 7, 3rd floor. I've got visual confirmation. Briggs's team converged with professional precision, stacking on the door, clearing the stairwell, sweeping each room with weapons up and hearts pounding. The building was empty, except for a single brass casing deliberately placed on a windowsill, engraved with 3 characters that made Briggs's blood run cold. 1 of 42. "She's counting us," he whispered. "Like targets." Torres found the second message, 20 minutes later. Building 3. Southwest window movement reported team deployed, building cleared. Empty except for a mirror array positioned to catch sunlight and create the illusion of motion from 200 meters away. A note was taped beside it. Sun angle 43 degrees, reflection distance 200 ms. Basic optics. Sophia was teaching them while hunting them, and they were failing every lesson. 40 minutes into the exercise, Morrison's communications suddenly went dead. Primary frequency white noise, secondary backup jammed, emergency tertiary channel crackled to life with Sophia's voice. "This is your target. Your comms are my comms now. I've been listening to every order you've given since the exercise began. Your tactical coordination is compromised. Your element of surprise is gone. And you still haven't adapted to my presence in your command structure." Morrison's hands were shaking now. "How is this possible? These are encrypted military channels." "Encryption is only as good as the protocols protecting it. Your unit logged into these frequencies using standard authentication codes that haven't been changed in 18 months. I cracked them 3 days ago." The implication hit like a physical blow. Every order he'd given, every position he'd revealed, every tactical decision he'd made, she'd heard all of it. "You've been playing us from the beginning. I've been evaluating you from the beginning. There's a difference. The question is whether you're capable of learning that difference before the exercise ends." Then static. Morrison stood alone in the silence, the full scope of his failure pressing down on him like a physical weight. Charlie team reached their rally point at the abandoned motor pool where they'd cached backup equipment the night before. What they found made their tactical situation crystal clear. Every piece of equipment had been moved. Not stolen, not destroyed. Rearranged in perfect geometric patterns. Weapons field-stripped and sorted by component. Ammunition organized by caliber and manufacturer date. Communications equipment laid out in schematic formations that demonstrated intimate knowledge of their specifications. The note left on their primary radio read, "OPSEC failures documented." 1. Visible planning. 2. Predictable caches. 3. Assuming home field advantage. You have 90 minutes remaining. Sergeant Williams keyed his radio with trembling hands. "Morrison, this is Charlie team. She's been through our cache. Everything's accounted for, but she reorganized it. She wanted us to know she was here." Morrison's response was barely controlled. "Regroup on grid square Tango 7. High ground, excellent visibility. We're consolidating forces." It was textbook defensive doctrine. It was exactly what Sophia had been waiting for. As 42 soldiers converged on the high ground, establishing overlapping fields of fire and interlocking security, they felt for the first time like they might have regained control of the situation. Elevated position, clear sight lines, mutual support, every tactical advantage they could imagine. Sophia's voice crackled across their radios one final time. "Textbook positioning. Perfect conventional tactics." Morrison's blood turned to ice. "Unfortunately, you're not facing a conventional threat. You're not in a defensive position, soldiers. You're in a kill box I designed 3 days ago." The smoke grenade landed in the center of their formation from an angle no one was watching. White phosphorus turned their perfect visibility into zero visibility in 4 seconds. Chaos erupted. Soldiers went prone. Established security perimeters tried to maintain unit cohesion despite complete loss of visual reference. Training kicked in, decades of muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. But training had never prepared them for what came next. Torres disappeared first. One moment he was on the perimeter, weapon up, scanning through the smoke. The next he felt fingers on his throat, not grabbing, just touching, and then pressure on a nerve cluster he didn't know existed. His body went limp. By the time he hit the ground, his hands were zip-tied behind his back, and his radio had been removed. The whole thing took 8 seconds. A paired position on the eastern perimeter heard a rock thrown to their left. Standard diversion tactic, they separated by 15 meters to investigate from different angles. Sophia eliminated each within 22 seconds. First soldier nerve strike to the brachial plexus collapse restraints. Second soldier joint lock on the knee, controlled takedown restraints. Neither saw her coming. Neither heard her approach. Neither understood how a single operator could move through their formation like a ghost made of violence. Briggs had learned something from the dining facility. He'd taken a non-standard position, maintained irregular movement patterns, stayed low and mobile instead of fixed and predictable. He lasted 3 minutes. Sophia found him through a displaced dust pattern where he'd shifted his weight one too many times. She came from below when he was looking above, and this time she used a different technique, a compliance hold instead of the nerve strike. "Better, Sergeant." Her voice came over the radio for everyone still conscious to hear. "You're learning. Slowly, painfully, but learning." The smoke began to clear. Soldiers were reforming, trying to account for personnel, and the numbers made their blood run cold. 7 eliminated in the first 6 minutes. 7 more in the next 8 minutes as Sophia moved through their formation like a surgeon's knife through tissue, demonstrating techniques that most of them had only read about in classified training manuals. Close quarters combat at a level that seemed almost supernatural. Pressure point manipulation that dropped 200-pound soldiers like puppets with cut strings. Joint locks that left men gasping in pain without causing permanent damage. And always the radio commentary. Specialist Martinez failed to check his 6. Eliminated. Corporal Johnson telegraph his movements. Eliminated. Sergeant Williams maintained predictable patterns. Eliminated. Each name was a lesson. Each elimination was a teaching moment. And the soldiers still standing were learning terror they'd never known existed. Morrison found himself alone. His radio was silent. Either everyone was eliminated, or everyone was too afraid to transmit. The smoke had cleared, but he couldn't see any of his soldiers, couldn't hear any movement except his own panicked breathing. 24 eliminated. Sophia's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. 18 remaining. 73 minutes left in the exercise. "What's your next move, Sergeant?" Morrison's training screamed at him to establish contact with his remaining forces to coordinate a response to do something. Instead, he did something unexpected. He stopped. He lowered his weapon. He sat down on the bare ground with his back against a concrete barrier, and he spoke into his radio knowing she was listening. "Commander Chen, permission to speak freely." Silence. Then, "Granted. I understand what you're doing. You're not just beating us, you're teaching us. Every technique, every elimination, every piece of commentary. This isn't combat. It's a classroom, and we're the failing students." No response. "Last night I thought you were an enemy. Someone who wanted to destroy us because of what happened to your friends. But that's not it, is it? You want us to be better. You want us to understand why we failed, so we don't fail again." When Sophia's voice came back, something had shifted in her tone. "Go on?" "You could have written your report last night. You had enough evidence to end every career in my unit. But you gave us this exercise instead. This chance. Why?" The silence stretched so long that Morrison thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke, and her voice carried something that sounded almost like respect. Because my mentor taught me that the goal isn't to destroy what's broken. It's to rebuild it into something stronger. She paused. Senior Chief Marcus Webb believed that the best operators weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who learned from their mistakes faster than anyone else. Morrison closed his eyes. How do we pass this test? How do we prove that we can learn? You just took the first step, Sergeant. You stopped fighting and started thinking. That's more than most people manage. For the first time since the dining facility, Morrison felt something other than despair. What's the second step? Tell your remaining soldiers to stop hiding and start observing. The exercise isn't over, but the rules just changed. Morrison keyed his radio. All remaining Delta personnel stand down. I say again, stand down. New orders incoming. Private Marcus Wells was the only soldier who had remained undetected. Not through skill, through accident. When the smoke grenade landed, he'd stumbled into a drainage culvert and frozen in place, too terrified to move, too inexperienced to know what else to do. But as he lay there in the darkness, listening to his teammates being eliminated one by one, something shifted in his mind. He stopped thinking like a soldier following orders. He started thinking like the enemy. Where would she be? Not where he expected. Not where anyone expected. She'd be somewhere they'd already cleared, somewhere they'd already dismissed as safe. Wells began moving toward the motor pool, toward the cache she'd already compromised. Because no one would think to look there twice. It took him 18 minutes to reach the position without being detected. 18 minutes of moving through terrain he'd trained on for months, seeing it with new eyes, understanding for the first time why assumptions were so dangerous. And when he arrived, he found something that made his heart stop. Sophia Chen was sitting on an ammunition crate watching the building entrance with a small smile on her face. She'd known he was coming. Private Wells, 18 minutes. Impressive. He froze. I watched you fall into that culvert. I could have eliminated you in the first 30 seconds. Do you know why I didn't? He shook his head. Because you did something none of your teammates managed. When the chaos started, you stopped and observed. You didn't follow the script. You thought for yourself. She stood up, moving toward him with that fluid grace that made her seem less like a person and more like a force of nature. That's the difference between a soldier and an operator private. Soldiers follow orders. Operators adapt to reality. Your teammates followed their training right into my kill box. You abandoned your training and survived. Wells's voice came out as barely a whisper. Am I eliminated? Sophia looked at him for a long moment. That depends on what you do next. She held out her hand. And Private Marcus Wells, 21 years old and scared beyond anything he'd ever experienced, made a choice. He took it. Wells took Sophia's hand, and in that moment something shifted in the universe. Not the physical universe, the moral one. The one where assumptions lived and died, where arrogance was either challenged or allowed to fester, where the difference between a good soldier and a great one was measured in moments of choice. Why? Wells asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are you giving me a chance when you eliminated everyone else? Sophia pulled him to his feet with surprising gentleness. Because you earned it. Not through skill, you're barely trained. Not through experience, you have almost none. But through the one thing that can't be taught. She looked into his eyes. Humility. When chaos hit, you didn't pretend you knew what to do. You admitted you were lost. And that admission saved your life. Wells swallowed hard. What happens now? Now you help me teach the others what you just learned. Sophia keyed her radio. Exercise terminated. All personnel weapons safe. Report to the parade ground in 15 minutes. She looked at Wells with something that might have been approval. "Stay close. Watch how this unfolds. And remember, the hardest part of learning is admitting you needed to learn in the first place." The parade ground was a study in devastation. 42 soldiers stood in formation, but formation was a generous term for what they'd managed. Half of them were still flexing fingers numbed by nerve strikes. Several were rotating shoulders that had come within degrees of dislocation. All of them wore the hollow-eyed expression of men who'd just discovered they weren't nearly as capable as they'd believed. Morrison stood at the front, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Sophia with an expression that had evolved from fear, through desperation, and finally settled on something that looked almost like respect. General Stone observed from the ridge, his weathered face betraying nothing. Colonel Vance and Major Bradley flanked him, tablets in hand, documenting everything for reports that would determine the futures of everyone present. Sophia walked to the center of the formation with Private Wells half a step behind her. "Before we discuss performance," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the parade ground, "you need context." She pulled a folder from her tactical vest, the same slim leather folder she'd carried into the dining facility the night before. "This contains orders from Naval Special Warfare Command and Army Special Forces leadership. Orders authorizing me to recommend Delta Company for dissolution based on documented evidence of institutional failures, professional misconduct, and inability to adapt to modern operational requirements." The words hit like artillery shells. 8 months ago, SEAL Team 3 conducted a joint operation with your sister company in Helmand Province. The mission brief promised a clear route. Reality was 12 hostiles, a weapons cache, and a prepared ambush. Her voice didn't waver, but something in her eyes went distant. Lieutenant David Ramirez died in the first explosion. He never finished the joke he was telling over the radio. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb burned to death in the lead vehicle. My mentor, the man who pulled me through Bud's training when I wanted to quit. She paused, and the silence was absolute. Petty Officer First Class Diana Torres, my best friend since boot camp, died 3 meters from my position. I held her hand while she bled out in Afghan dirt. Her last words were, "Not your fault." Morrison's face had gone gray. Chief Petty Officer James Park never met his daughter. His wife gave birth 6 weeks after we shipped his body home. The little girl has her father's eyes and she'll never know him, except through photographs and stories. Sophia held up the folder. The investigation revealed that Army intelligence provided faulty route clearance based on outdated satellite imagery. They dismissed contradictory intelligence from CIA assets. They ignored warnings from Afghan contacts who actually knew the terrain. She looked directly at Morrison. They made assumptions. The same kind of assumptions I witnessed in your dining facility last night. The same kind of institutional arrogance that killed my friends. Her voice hardened. My mission here wasn't just evaluation. It was determination. These orders authorize me to recommend your dissolution, to end Delta Company's existence, and distribute its personnel to other units where proper oversight can prevent the kind of culture that gets Americans killed. The weight of those words pressed down on every soldier like a physical force. Your performance today was supposed to decide which recommendation I make. Morrison stepped forward, and to his credit, his voice was steady. Commander Chen, we failed. Every test you set, every opportunity you gave us, we failed. I understand that now. He removed his rank insignia and held them in his palm. But the worst failure wasn't tactical. It wasn't the eliminated soldiers, or the compromised communications, or the kill box we walked into, like idiots. He met her eyes without flinching. The worst failure was that we didn't see you as an operator. We saw you as an obstacle, as something to be managed rather than respected. That thinking killed your friends, and it nearly destroyed our unit. He extended the rank insignia toward her. I formally request one thing: don't punish my soldiers for my failures. If someone has to pay for what happened, let it be me. But give these men a chance to prove they can change. Sophia looked at the insignia in his outstretched hand for a long moment. Keep your rank, Sergeant. You're going to need it. Morrison's eyes widened. Ma'am, the exercise revealed exactly what I expected to find: a unit so convinced of its own superiority that it stopped questioning its assumptions. You failed every tactical test I designed. Your operational security was non-existent. Your communication protocols were compromised before I even set foot on this base. She paused. But you also demonstrated something I didn't expect. Morrison waited, barely breathing. Capacity for learning. When you realized you were outmatched, you stopped fighting and started thinking. You asked the right questions. You listened to the answers. That's more than most units manage. She looked around at the assembled soldiers. Private Wells survived the longest, not because he was the most skilled, but because he was the most humble. When chaos hit, he admitted he didn't know what to do, and that admission opened his mind to solutions he never would have found otherwise. Wells felt every eye in the formation turn toward him, and his face flushed. That's the difference between soldiers who die in their first firefight and operators who survive decades of combat. Not strength, not speed, not tactical brilliance. Humility. The willingness to admit when you're wrong and adapt to reality instead of clinging to assumptions. Briggs stepped forward, his injured arm still cradled against his chest. Commander, I grabbed you because I thought I could. Because I looked at a woman sitting alone and saw weakness. I made assumptions that almost cost me my career and my shoulder. He took a shaky breath. I request permission to learn actual combat techniques, not the bullying tactics I've been using. Real skills from someone who actually knows what they're doing. Torres was next. I was going to post video of what I thought would be entertainment at your expense. I was so obsessed with followers and engagement that I forgot why I joined the army in the first place. He held up his phone. I deleted my account this morning. If Delta Company survives this, I want to be the kind of soldier people respect, not the kind who goes viral for the wrong reasons. One by one, each soldier stepped forward with specific acknowledgments. Not generic apologies, precise technical admissions of failure that demonstrated they actually understood what had gone wrong. General Stone descended from the ridge, his boots crunching on gravel as he approached the formation. Permission to address the unit commander, Chen. Sophia nodded, something passing between them that spoke of mutual respect earned through decades of service. 1983, Stone said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of experience. Beirut barracks bombing. I was a young lieutenant with 2nd Battalion. We assumed we knew everything about force protection. Assumed our Marines were invincible. Assumed security protocols were someone else's job. His jaw tightened. 241 Marines died because we ignored intelligence from sources we deemed unreliable. Because institutional arrogance overrode professional discipline. Because we were too proud to admit we might be wrong. He looked at the assembled soldiers. I spent 30 years learning that humility isn't weakness, it's survival. These men failed today. So did I in Beirut. The difference is I got men killed. Commander Chen gave you a learning opportunity. He turned to Sophia. I recommend 72 hours of intensive integration training under your direct supervision. My observation, this unit has capacity for change if properly guided. His voice softened. But the decision is yours, Commander. You earned that right in Helmand. Sophia studied each soldier for a long moment. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something more useful: determination. The desire to prove they could be better than the men who'd walked into that dining facility thinking they owned the world. General, I concur with your recommendation. Conditional on zero tolerance for repeat failures. The relief that swept through the formation was almost visible. Training begins immediately. Day 1. Close quarters combat. I'm going to demonstrate every elimination technique from this exercise, break down the physics, the anatomy, the psychology, the timing. You're going to practice each one until you can execute them with your eyes closed. She looked at Briggs. Sergeant, you're going to be my first demonstration partner. Since you were so eager to test your skills against mine, let's see how you handle actually learning something. Briggs swallowed hard, but nodded. Yes, ma'am. Day 2 joint operations. Delta Company will run a compound assault with SEAL Team 3. You're going to learn how to work with operators who don't share your assumptions, your training, or your institutional biases. And you're going to do it until you can coordinate seamlessly with people who were strangers 48 hours earlier. Morrison spoke up. And Day 3, ma'am? Sophia's smile was cold, but not without hope. Day 3, you get another chance. Same exercise, same parameters, same 4 square kilometers. She looked around at the formation. Let's see if you've learned anything. The first day was hell. Sophia demonstrated the nerve strike on Briggs 73 times before he executed it correctly. Each failure came with immediate feedback, not cruel, but relentless. Each success was met with another technique, another challenge, another opportunity to prove he was capable of growth. Competence isn't talent, she told him after his 47th attempt. It's repetition past the point of failure. The soldiers who survive combat aren't the ones who get things right the first time. They're the ones who refuse to stop trying until they get it right every time. Briggs's hands were shaking by the end of the session, but something had changed in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the focused determination of someone who'd finally found a teacher worthy of respect. Torres learned communication protocols that made his previous skills look like children's toys: encryption methods, frequency hopping, counter-surveillance techniques that would have prevented Sophia from compromising their entire command structure. You had the technical ability all along, she told him. What you lacked was the imagination to question whether your security was actually secure. Never assume your systems are unbreakable. Assume they're already compromised and work backward from there. Wells became Sophia's shadow, watching everything, absorbing lessons that would have taken years to learn through normal training. She explained her thought process during the exercise, how she'd identified vulnerabilities, created distractions, maneuvered the entire unit into a kill box of her own design. The enemy doesn't play fair, she said. They don't follow your rules or respect your assumptions. They exploit whatever weakness you give them. Your job is to give them nothing. Morrison spent the first day questioning everything he thought he knew about leadership. Sophia showed him after-action reports from successful joint operations, pointing out the patterns that separated effective commanders from the ones who got their people killed. Authority isn't automatic, she said. It's earned through competence, maintained through respect, and destroyed the moment you start believing you can't be wrong. He nodded slowly. I thought being in charge meant having all the answers. Being in charge means knowing which questions to ask and having the humility to listen to the answers, even when they come from people you didn't expect. Day 2 was worse. SEAL Team 3 arrived at 0500 and Delta Company got their first taste of what genuine special operators looked like up close. These weren't arrogant posers convinced of their own superiority. They were quiet professionals who moved with the kind of confident humility that came from decades of proven excellence. The first compound assault was a disaster. Delta Company deferred too much, treating the SEALs as superiors rather than partners. They hesitated when they should have moved when they should have held, and communicated with the awkward formality of people who didn't trust each other enough to speak freely. Sophia stopped the exercise after 19 minutes. Partnership means equals, not subordinates. You're not here to follow SEALs around like puppies waiting for commands. You're here to complement their capabilities with your own. The second attempt was better. The third was almost functional. By the fourth, something remarkable began to emerge: genuine coordination between forces that had started the day as strangers. Morrison called out threats that SEAL operators responded to instantly. Briggs covered angles that SEAL team members trusted him to hold. Torres relayed information through channels that both units could access seamlessly. The compound was cleared in 23 minutes. Sophia gathered both teams afterward. That's what inter-service cooperation actually looks like. Not one branch dominating another. Not assumptions about who's better or more capable. Just soldiers working together toward a common objective with mutual respect and professional competence. She looked at Morrison. Your unit has the potential to be something special. Not despite your failures because of them. You've learned what it feels like to be wrong, to be humiliated, to have everything you believed about yourselves proven false. Her voice softened. That's a gift. Most people go their entire careers without having their assumptions challenged so completely. Use it. Day 3 arrived with the weight of everything that had come before. Same exercise, same parameters, same 4 square kilometers. But Delta Company was not the same unit that had walked into the dining facility 3 days earlier. They challenged Sophia's credentials immediately upon contact, demanded verification codes, confirmed her authorization through channels she hadn't compromised. Security 1-1. The kind of basic protocol they should have demonstrated from the beginning. Their movement patterns were unconventional, borrowed from the lessons Wells had learned by accident, and refined through 2 days of intensive training. They didn't follow the scripts their enemies expected. They adapted to reality instead of clinging to doctrine. They implemented counter-surveillance techniques that eliminated the Building 14 observation point before Sophia could use it. They changed frequencies randomly, making it impossible to track their communications. They moved in patterns that defied prediction. First contact came at 18 minutes. Not with Sophia in control, with Delta Company having identified her position through patient observation and coordinated analysis. They'd learned to think like the enemy, to anticipate her movements, to counter her techniques. The chase lasted 47 more minutes. Sophia used every trick in her extensive arsenal. Decoys that had worked perfectly in the first exercise failed completely. Diversions that had scattered their formation before were identified and ignored. Psychological pressure that had broken their cohesion 3 days ago now seemed to strengthen their resolve. Successful capture at 1 hour and 12 minutes. Morrison's team contained her using techniques she'd taught them herself, applied with the kind of precision that demonstrated genuine understanding rather than rote memorization. When they finally brought her back to the observation point, General Stone was smiling for the first time in 3 days. You adapted, Sophia told them, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like pride. You questioned assumptions. You collaborated. You didn't beat me through superior force, you beat me through superior thinking. She looked at Morrison. That's what makes operators. Not invincibility. Adaptability. When Colonel Vance stepped forward with a tablet displaying Sophia's assessment report. 52 pages. Every failure documented. Every violation cataloged. Every assumption that brought you to the dining facility 3 days ago analyzed and explained. The soldiers braced for impact. Final recommendation: Delta Company not approved for dissolution. The relief that swept through the formation was physical. Conditional approval pending quarterly joint training and ongoing cultural audit. Rationale: demonstrated capacity for rapid institutional learning under extreme pressure. General Stone added his endorsement. These soldiers transformed in 72 hours. That's rare. I recommend Delta Company becomes the model for inter-service integration going forward. Morrison's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you, Commander. We won't waste this chance. Sophia looked at him, with eyes that still carried the weight of Helmand, still remembered Diana's last words, still heard Marcus's unfinished joke echoing through her dreams. Don't thank me, Sergeant. Prove me right. She turned to face the entire formation one final time. 3 days ago, I walked into your dining facility expecting to find arrogance, incompetence, and institutional failure. I found all three, but I also found something I didn't expect: men capable of recognizing their failures and choosing to be better. Her voice carried across the parade ground. That choice isn't a one-time thing. It's something you make every single day, with every decision in every moment, when it would be easier to fall back on assumptions and arrogance. The soldiers you were 3 days ago would have gotten Americans killed. The soldiers you are now might actually be worth something. She gathered her equipment with practiced efficiency. Don't prove me wrong. And with that, Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen walked off the parade ground, leaving 42 soldiers to contemplate everything they'd learned and everything they still had left to prove. Behind her, General Stone turned to Colonel Vance. I've been in this army for 40 years. That's the most effective 3-day training program I've ever witnessed. Vance nodded slowly. What do we call it? For the official report. Stone watched Sophia's figure disappear into the distance. Call it the Hayes Protocol, after the commander who designed it. He paused. And make sure every base in the army knows about it. What happened here this week needs to happen everywhere. 3 months changed everything. The dining facility at Fort Bragg operated differently now. The territorial tables had disappeared, replaced by integrated seating where Army and Navy personnel shared meals without the invisible walls that had once divided them. The crude jokes about female soldiers had stopped, not because of regulations, but because the culture that produced them had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt. Morrison sat at a table near the window, watching new recruits file through the serving line. His shoulders carried a different kind of weight, now the burden of someone who understood that leadership meant constant vigilance rather than casual dominance. Sergeant Morrison. He looked up to find a young specialist standing at attention, tablet in hand. At ease, Kowalski. What do you need? Colonel Vance wants to see you, Sergeant. Conference room B. She said it's urgent. Morrison's stomach tightened. 3 months of perfect performance, and still his first instinct was fear. Fear that somehow, some way, everything they'd rebuilt was about to collapse. He found Briggs waiting outside the conference room, his expression unreadable. You know what this is about? Briggs shook his head. No idea, but Vance has been on calls with Pentagon all morning. Something's happening. They entered together and found Colonel Vance standing before a wall display showing deployment routes across the Middle East. Gentlemen, close the door. Morrison complied, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 hours ago, SEAL Team 3 was ambushed during an extraction operation in Syria. They're pinned down in a compound with 12 hostiles and no way out. The words hit like physical blows. Commander Chen. Vance's jaw tightened. She's leading the team. Last communication indicated they were taking fire from 3 directions with wounded operators and ammunition running low. Morrison felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The woman who had broken them down and rebuilt them. The commander who had given them a second chance when she had every right to destroy them. The operator who had taught them that humility was strength and assumptions were death. She was trapped, and she might be dying. "What do you need from us, Colonel? Delta Company has been assigned as the Quick Reaction Force. You deploy in 45 minutes. Morrison looked at Briggs, and something passed between them, an understanding forged in 3 days of humiliation and 3 months of transformation. "We'll be ready in 30. The flight to Syria took 7 hours. 7 hours of planning preparation and the particular kind of fear that came from knowing you were flying into a situation where everything could go wrong. 7 hours of reviewing intelligence, coordinating with command, and praying that they wouldn't be too late. Morrison gathered his team in the cargo hold as the aircraft approached the drop zone. "Listen up. 3 months ago, Commander Chen taught us what it meant to be real soldiers. She showed us our failures, broke down our arrogance, and gave us a chance to become something better than the men who walked into that dining facility thinking they owned the world." He looked at each soldier in turn. "Tonight, we repay that debt. We get in, we get our people out, and we leave nothing behind except dead hostiles. No assumptions, no ego. Just the job." Briggs spoke up, his voice carrying above the engine noise. "What's our intelligence on the compound?" "Limited. Satellite imagery shows a 3-story structure with SEAL team pinned on the 2nd floor. Hostile positions on all 4 corners of the surrounding perimeter. Ammunition and supplies unknown." Torres raised his hand. "Communication status. Intermittent. Last contact was 2 hours ago. Commander Chen reported 3 wounded, 2 critical. They're running low on everything." Wells, now wearing sergeant stripes that had been earned through 3 months of exceptional performance, asked the question everyone was thinking. "What's our timeline, Sarge?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "Command estimates they have 4 hours before hostile reinforcements arrive. If we don't extract them before then, we're looking at a siege situation with no good outcomes." The soldiers absorbed this in silence. "We've trained for this," Morrison continued. "We've practiced these scenarios with SEAL Team 3. We know their protocols, their hand signals, their extraction procedures. This isn't a group of strangers, these are our partners, our allies, our friends." He paused. "And one of them is the woman who gave us a second chance when we didn't deserve one. We will not let her down." The drop was textbook. 42 soldiers hit the ground in coordinated waves, establishing perimeters and communication protocols with the precision that had been drilled into them through 3 months of intensive training. The chaos of their first exercise with Sophia seemed like a lifetime ago. They moved now, like a single organism, anticipating each other's movements, trusting each other's capabilities. Morrison keyed his radio. "Overwatch, this is ground lead. We're in position. Beginning approach to objective. Ground lead Overwatch. Be advised we're detecting movement in the hostile perimeter. They know you're coming." "Understood. Switching to Protocol Delta 7. The soldiers shifted their approach without hesitation. A movement pattern they'd developed specifically for situations where their arrival had been compromised. Instead of direct assault, they dispersed into smaller teams, approaching from angles that maximized confusion and minimized exposure. Briggs led the first team toward the eastern perimeter. His injured arm had healed completely, and the techniques Sophia had taught him were now second nature. He moved through the darkness like a shadow, neutralizing hostile positions with the kind of quiet efficiency that would have been impossible 3 months earlier. Torres coordinated communications from a concealed position, his equipment cycling through frequencies in patterns that prevented hostile interception. The same skills that had once been focused on Instagram followers were now keeping his team alive. Wells commanded a fire team on the western approach, using the unconventional movement patterns that had saved his life during the first exercise. He'd learned to think like the enemy to anticipate their responses to be where they didn't expect. The compound was surrounded in 18 minutes. Morrison's voice came through the radio. "All teams in position. Initiating breach on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute." The assault was synchronized violence at its finest. 4 entry points breached simultaneously. Hostile positions overwhelmed before they could coordinate response. 12 enemies neutralized in the first 30 seconds through techniques that Sophia had demonstrated on their own bodies 3 months earlier. Morrison was the first to reach the second floor. He found SEAL Team 3 barricaded behind overturned furniture, their weapons pointed at the doorway, ready to fight to the last round. "U.S. Army Delta Company, we're here to get you out." The weapons lowered, and Morrison saw something he'd never expected to see in his military career relief on the faces of Navy SEALs. "About damn time." The voice was weak, strained, but unmistakable. Sophia Chen was propped against the far wall, her left arm wrapped in bloodied bandages, her face pale from blood loss, but her eyes still carrying that same intensity that had dismantled their egos in the dining facility. Morrison crossed to her position and dropped to one knee. "Commander Chen, we're getting you out of here." She looked up at him with an expression that combined exhaustion, pain, and something that might have been pride. "Sergeant Morrison, I was wondering when you'd show up." "Couldn't let you have all the fun, ma'am." She laughed, a weak sound that cost her more than she wanted to show. "Your approach was good. Unconventional movement patterns. Counter-surveillance on the hostile communications. You learned something. We had a good teacher." Briggs appeared in the doorway. "Compound is secure. We've got transport inbound, but hostile reinforcements are 20 minutes out. We need to move." Morrison helped Sophia to her feet, supporting her weight, as they moved toward the extraction point. "Can you walk? I can do whatever I have to do. The others need evac first. 2 of my operators are critical." "Already handled. Torres coordinated medical priority. Critical wounded are being loaded now." She looked at him with those green eyes that had seen right through his arrogance 3 months ago. "You really did learn." The extraction was flawless. Helicopters arrived at the precisely coordinated moment, touched down in patterns that minimized exposure time, and lifted off with all personnel before hostile reinforcements could engage. Delta Company had just executed a textbook rescue operation against impossible odds. And they'd saved the woman who had taught them everything they knew. The debrief happened at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. General Stone had flown in specifically for the after-action review, his weathered face showing something that looked remarkably like emotion. 42 soldiers, 12 hostiles neutralized, 0 friendly casualties, 7 wounded operators extracted, including 3 critical, who are now stable and expected to make full recoveries. He looked at Morrison. "That's the kind of mission that builds legends, Sergeant." Morrison shook his head. "We just did what we were trained to do, sir. Commander Chen taught us that the job isn't about glory, it's about getting our people home. And you got our people home, including the commander who trained you." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 3 months ago, Stone continued, I watched Commander Chen dismantle your unit in a way I've never seen before. I watched her expose every failure, every weakness, every toxic element in your culture. And I watched her give you a choice change, or cease to exist. He paused. Tonight I watched the results of that choice. Delta Company isn't just a functional unit anymore. You're one of the finest quick reaction forces in the United States military. Morrison felt his throat tighten. We had help, sir. You had a teacher who refused to give up on you. That's rare, Sergeant. Most commanders would have written you off after the dining facility incident. Most evaluators would have submitted their dissolution recommendation and moved on to the next problem. Stone's voice softened. Commander Chen saw something in your unit that no one else could see. Potential. the capacity for change. And she invested 3 days of her life in turning that potential into reality. He looked around the room at the assembled soldiers. You repaid that investment tonight. You brought her home when she couldn't bring herself home. That's what real soldiers do. They take care of each other regardless of branch, regardless of history, regardless of the failures that came before. The room was silent. I'm recommending Delta Company for the Joint Service Achievement Medal. But more importantly, I'm recommending that the Hayes Protocol be implemented at every major military installation in the United States. Morrison's eyes widened. Sir, what happened at Fort Bragg 3 months ago wasn't just about one unit. It was a model for how we should be training all of our soldiers. The combination of tactical excellence, cultural accountability, and inter-service cooperation that Commander Chen demonstrated, that's what the military of the future needs to look like. He straightened. The Hayes Protocol, named after the 26-year-old SEAL commander who taught a group of arrogant soldiers how to be actual warriors. The hospital in Germany was quiet at 0300 hours. Morrison found Sophia in a private room, her arm in a proper cast, now IV lines feeding fluids and antibiotics into her system. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, more human than the force of nature who had walked into their dining facility and systematically destroyed everything they thought they knew. Sergeant, you should be sleeping. So should you, ma'am. She smiled weakly. I don't sleep well after operations. Too many ghosts. Morrison pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down. Ma'am, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said 3 months ago. Sophia waited. When you walked into that dining facility, I looked at you and saw everything I'd been trained to dismiss. A woman. Alone. Without visible authority. I made assumptions based on nothing except my own arrogance, and those assumptions almost cost me my career and my unit. He paused. But more than that, they almost cost me the chance to become the soldier I should have been all along. Sophia's expression softened. You're not the first man to make those assumptions, Sergeant. You won't be the last. No, but I might be one of the few who actually learned from it. He leaned forward. When I saw you trapped in that compound, taking fire wounded, running out of time, all I could think was that we had to get you out. Not because you're a commander, not because you saved our careers, because you're family now. You're part of Delta Company whether you wear our uniform or not. Sophia's eyes glistened, and for the first time since Morrison had met her, she looked vulnerable. That's what I wanted, Sergeant. That's what I've always wanted. Not to destroy units or end careers, to build something. To create connections between branches that would make us stronger together than we ever could be apart. She looked toward the window. Marcus Webb used to say that the best operators weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who turned their mistakes into lessons, and their lessons into legacies. Her voice caught. I've been trying to honor his memory ever since Helmand. Trying to make sure his death meant something. That Diana's death meant something. That James's death meant something. Morrison reached out and took her uninjured hand. It does, ma'am. Every soldier in Delta Company carries what you taught us. Every operation we run reflects the lessons you forced us to learn. Every assumption we question, every protocol we verify, every moment we choose humility over arrogance, that's their legacy. That's your legacy. Sophia squeezed his hand. Thank you, Sergeant, for coming to get me. For not giving up when it would have been easier to write off a trapped SEAL team as someone else's problem. We don't leave our people behind, ma'am. You taught us that. 6 months later, the changes were visible across the entire military. The Hayes Protocol had been implemented at Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Hood, and Camp Pendleton. Other branches were developing their own versions, adapting the principles to their specific needs while maintaining the core philosophy that Sophia had demonstrated. Assumptions kill. Humility saves. Excellence is a choice made daily. Morrison was teaching now a new assignment at the Army War College, passing on the lessons he'd learned to the next generation of officers. His curriculum included detailed analysis of the dining facility incident, not as a story of humiliation, but as a case study in institutional transformation. Briggs had completed SEAL selection and was now serving with Team 3, the first Army operator to successfully integrate into a Navy Special Operations unit. He'd earned his place not through aggression, but through the quiet competence that Sophia had beaten into him one nerve strike at a time. Torres had developed a new communications protocol that was now standard across joint operations. His technical skills, once wasted on social media, were saving lives in combat zones around the world. Wells had been promoted to Sergeant First Class ahead of schedule. His unconventional thinking, the same instinct that had saved his life during the first exercise, was now being taught to recruits as a model for adaptive warfare. And Sophia Chen was still doing what she did best. She stood outside a dining facility at Camp Lejeune, wearing a uniform stripped of rank insignia, watching a group of Marines who had no idea their world was about to change. Word had reached Naval Special Warfare Command about a unit with discipline problems, a culture of harassment, assumptions that were getting in the way of operational effectiveness. The same story, different base, different soldiers, same opportunity for transformation. She entered the dining facility and found an empty table in the corner. Back to the wall. Clear sight lines to all exits, notebook in hand. A Marine corporal noticed her within 15 minutes. His approach was predatory testing boundaries, assuming superiority based on nothing except her gender and apparent lack of visible rank. "Excuse me, ma'am. I don't think we've been introduced." Sophia looked up with those green eyes that had broken stronger men than this one. "No, we haven't." The corporal extended his hand with forced friendliness. "I'm Corporal Davis, Bravo Company, and you are—" Sophia looked at his outstretched hand for exactly 2 seconds. "Busy." The word hit like a physical blow. And in a dining facility on the other side of the country, the cycle began again. Because excellence wasn't a destination. It was a journey, a choice made every single day by soldiers who understood that the moment you stopped questioning your assumptions was the moment you started dying. Lieutenant Commander Sophia Chen had learned that lesson in the blood-soaked doorway of a Helmand compound, watching her best friend die in Afghan dirt, while whispering words of absolution she didn't deserve. She'd spent the years since then ensuring that lesson lived on one transformed unit at a time, one humbled soldier at a time, one shattered assumption at a time. The best leaders didn't just win battles. They created more leaders. They turned failure into wisdom, arrogance into humility, assumption into verification. They left every place better than they found it, even if it meant tearing it down first. That was the legacy of the dining room reckoning. That was the legacy of Marcus Webb, Diana Torres, and James Park. That was the legacy of a 26-year-old woman who walked into a room full of men who thought they knew everything and taught them exactly how much they still had to learn. And in dining facilities across America, in training grounds and combat zones, and classified operations that would never make the news, that legacy continued. One soldier at a time. One lesson at a time. One transformation at a time. Until the day came when assumptions no longer killed Americans. Until the day came when humility was strength. Until the day came when the ghosts of Helmand could finally rest. And Sophia Chen would keep teaching until that day arrived. Because that was what warriors did. They fought. They learned. They taught. And they never ever gave up on the people who needed them most.